So the session's entitled the Fireside Chat around MedTech startups, regulatory strategy to ensure your UK and EU market access. I'll just preface that while you're thinking about questions you'd like to ask. And if you don't ask any, I shall. Just think of it as you start thinking about that. So we've heard a lot about the transitions, just to remind you. I know very little about IVDRs. It's not something I've really got involved in, but certainly for conventional medical devices. At the moment, if it's been CE marked under the Medical Device Directive, then we will continue to recognise that until 2027, and that keeps moving. And if it's been under the new MDR, then until 2030. So that does give a bit of a leeway. I chair the Interim Devices Working Group, which is the sort of expert advisory group to the MHRA. There are lots of subgroups and subspecialties. But since November of 22, I've been chairing that group. And there is an enormous amount of discussion going on. I appreciate, and I also move back the other way and say we support a lot of small medical device manufacturers who are just confused, as we are, and they want to know. There is a lot of discussion. I think the IDWG's applying a lot of pressure to say you have to come up with some workable solution. Saying we want the best regulatory process in the world, which is some of the statements around it all, is fine. There's nothing wrong in that. But you mustn't have a regulatory process that inhibits innovation, and you mustn't have a regulatory process that prevents companies being able to sell technology into the NHS, because we won't have a health service. So we've got to find a balance somewhere between the two. And someone made that comment about people going to the FDA first. We've certainly seen that. So the last 4 software as a medical device companies we've worked with have all gone to 510K first. And then are looking to come back and do UK CA/CE, because I think just basically, as someone said, you can't get notified body review under the MDR. Essentially, they're packed. The approved body expansion has occurred in the UK, and there is some capacity around there. But that's not recognised in Europe. It's not recognised in the States. UK, somewhere between 8-9% of the total global medical device market, so it's not desperately attractive if that's the only market you can sell into. So those are just sort of a few prefacing thoughts. No one's stuck their hand up, which is slightly worrying, but please, if you would like to stick your hand up, I'm very grateful around it all. Can I just ask the 3 new people that we've got, just very briefly, just very quickly, just to introduce yourselves and just tell us what role you sort of have. Should we start with Rich?
That's me.
That's you, thanks. But you've also got a microphone, which is even better.
Yeah, perfect, isn't it? Good morning, everyone. So my name is Rich Shaw. I'm the sustainability lead for PDM. We are a design and innovation agency. So I'm really up here to help field questions for startups thinking about their device and whether or not they should consider sustainability as part of it. So happy to take any questions in that angle.
Thank you very much indeed. That's perfect. You pass to your left then. Thank you.
So pleased to meet. So I'm Jacqueline van Druten. I'm from Clinara Plus. We do clinical regulatory needs. So this is from the start of your process to actually define that clinical need and how to map it out in a process that no matter where you are in your product life cycle, you know what you need to do next. So we've been involved in from startups to multinationals to help them with the transition to EU MDR, specifically looking at a document called the Clinical Development Plan. So this Clinical Development Plan is literally the seed document for your whole technical file and all your processes that you wish to deliver. So we've helped them to cross-map over various jurisdictions that they don't triple up, retesting it over and over again where there's certain small changes in the jurisdiction.
Thank you very much indeed. Then finally to Mattia, if you go to the microphone.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mattia, Commercialization Manager for Life Sciences and Medicine at the University of Leeds. Our team manages the intellectual property developed by academics at the University of Leeds and tries as best as it can to deliver it to the market.
Thank you very much indeed. So please, how are we going to handle chucking a microphone over? Do you want to grab one of those? I probably ought to just hang on to mine for the moment.
No, one of them's not working, so
oh, okay. Just shout.
So this is a bit of a build on a point I think you made slightly earlier, in that UK universities, I find, are extremely aggressive in their stance on IP. So we fund PhDs at Leeds University, but we don't fund anything in a UK university that has the potential to do product development or IP creation. We're currently working with Denver. I think you mentioned California, because the stance that the US universities seem to make is that the companies come to the university with an unsolved problem, an embryonic piece of IP, and what the university gets out of it is a bit of funding, but also their students get the experience, the collaboration with companies, whereas I find the UK universities are, it's almost like they think there's this golden egg that can generate a load of money for them. And there are probably multiple situations where we've just walked away from because it's too complex to have to get into a negotiation with the university legal department. So I just want, sorry, you were the last person to comment. I thought I'd get that one off my chest.
Yeah, let's just do something. I mean, I was just going to say, I will let you speak in a second, Mattia, but I mean, I'm full-time university employed, so I'd have to completely disagree with you in public. But I think you're absolutely right. You know, and as someone, you know, universities are pushing harder and harder for spin-outs. They want all of this sort of stuff. And yet the people doing it don't get rewarded for it. And we have to look at a different model around that. Mattia, would that be a good one for you to address?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be careful what I say because, but I can understand the frustration. No. I mean, well, there's a lot of work that is being done at the University of Leeds at the moment to create a new business engagement branch that is aimed at facilitating the interaction with industry. There has been a piece of work that was released by the government very recently around how universities are managing IP and what should be improved. I have to say that the US environment is very much different from the UK environment for several reasons. As a university, we have some obligations. Most of the funding that we receive are public funding, and that's where some of the complexity comes in. In terms of royalties and the way that we distribute IP revenues, we have a standard policy of 40% that goes directly to the inventors when it comes to licensing. And when it comes to spin-out, we give, well, we negotiate on the specific case the shares that we're going to retain on the company, but there is some work that is ongoing to try to reduce that as minimal as possible to give a little bit more freedom to operate to the company when they start to raise investment. One thing that is for sure is that the university is not managing IP to make money. That's a very big misconception. The money that we generate through commercialization are not going to my team or to the vice chancellor. They are being redirected to the schools that are funding the research and to fund more research and scholarships. So I don't see the university commercialization team to be like a greedy businessman. What we're trying to do is really to add value to the research that is done at the university and build on that to try to deliver to the public.
No, I think that's a good answer, and I think the important message to try and get across, absolutely. I mean, if you speak to industry, one of the things we say, because we're hosted by University Hospitals Birmingham, and they say we don't want to go anywhere near a university, and we explain that's not, it's an NHS trust and so on, but I do think it's changing. We have a similar process of looking at it and saying, look, you have to get, you know, a lot of expertise in the university, and it's just, you've got to work it out so it actually becomes attractive to inventors. So it's very nice to hear that you're doing that, and other universities are, but it is a message we have to get out. So I've got some written questions. I can read most of it. So to Richard, we keep talking about MDD and MDR, and it was just, if you just briefly explain why we've changed and what the difference is between the two, would be very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. And maybe at the end I'll riff a little bit on what you said at the beginning about the software company going to America, Tom.
Yes,
so historically, since 1990, we had the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive, which was launched in Europe. At the time, we were part of Europe. 1993, we had the Medical Device Directive launched. In 1998, we had the IVD Directive launched in Europe. And in 2002, there was a piece of legislation published in the UK that said the UK is part of Europe, and therefore we should follow their directives. And that's all it says. It takes 100 pages to say that, but that's basically what it says. So come Brexit, Brexit happened in January 2021, and in 2021, in May, the first regulation was launched in Europe in May 2021. So the MDR was launched. Brexit happened before, so the legislation in Europe, in the UK, sorry, the only thing we can fall back on is the old medical device directives that are being phased out in Europe. So that's where we are currently, MDD, IVDD in the UK. There's a transition to lose those within existing companies and existing products in Europe under the MDR and IVDR. We keep referring to the MDR and IVDR, but in the future it'll be a UK MDR and a European and EU MDR, so we should get used to that nomenclature. The UK MDR, if you look on the MHRA website, I haven't looked at it today, but I looked at it a week or two ago, and what it said is that the UK MDR, and this is the best of my knowledge, will be launched and released and become legal from July the 1st onwards, 2025. So up to 2025, we get the opportunity to use the MDD or the IVDD as a legal way of placing products on the market. And this gives you a big advantage if you're an IVD company or if you're a software company. So IVD companies in Europe, around about 80% of all IVDs were self-declared on the market. Only 20% needed a notified body. So if you look at that in the UK, if you start selling the product and license the product in the market in the UK, you can self-declare. You do that through the MHRA. If you've got a class 1, if you've got a medical device software, the only place in the MDD that you can put classification for software is under Rule 10. And Rule 10 says medical devices that do diagnosis are class 2A. And there's loads of medical devices that do monitoring, and that's where the loophole is currently. And that's going to close on July the 1st, 2025. So if you've got a product, an IVD or a software or any other class 1 device that's likely to be up-classified under the new regulation, then get to market as quickly as you can, and then you'll sit under the transition period. The reason I asked you that question was because any new products being placed on the market from the date of application of July the 1st, 2025, a brand new product will need to meet the requirements of the new UK MDR. And that's going to take a lot of effort, given that nobody knows what's in it yet. The MHRA, I was at a conference 6 months ago, and they said in the conference that it would be released in 2025, early 2025. And that doesn't give industry any time to get used to it. So I personally think it'll be pushed back a little bit, but you can't rely on that. You have to stick to what's on the MHRA website.
Thanks very much indeed. And just again, so we'll come to get the microphone around. So directives are not law. So European directives basically have to be enacted into law in each of the European states. So we enacted the device directive in 2002 into the UK MDR, and we've had to go back to that basically because we haven't adopted the new EU MDR. But I agree with you. I think it's helpful to call it EU MDR to make it that's clear, and then I think we'll have a UK MDR as we go forward, because I think that makes it much clearer. And again, to add to that we just don't know. I mean, it's been out for consultation, so they've had a lot of comments back about it. We don't know when it will actually change. What I think, again, I'm just going to nod, is that whatever happens, I think it's going to become more stringent. Now, I can't see it's becoming more relaxed. And I think the requirement, particularly for clinical evidence, is going to rise dramatically. And I think that's an area where people certainly need some help. There was a question.
Hi,
Please.
thanks. So I guess I come at this from an industry perspective. So I work for small medtech companies and also with academics at Sheffield. I think we've heard a lot over the last day or so around the journey and the requirements. Obviously, the regulatory pathway is so key to all of this. I know there was a quote yesterday that somebody said it takes 17 years to get from idea to market. We've obviously got the sustainability angle as well that Rich can talk about on the stage. So I guess my question from a small medtech angle is, when we go out to gain investment, when we talk to VCs or angel investors, they tell us that they need to see a return on their investment within 3 to 5 years. I guess I'd be interested if anyone's got comments around how we square that circle when we have regulatory pathways that go much further beyond that, but the investors want to see tangible returns within a much shorter period than is often achievable, particularly for the high-tech, high-risk devices, which is where the big markets and the big long-term returns are. I guess I'd be interested in anybody's views on how we square that circle.
It's a good question. Should we just, someone else like to? Please, that would be very helpful. Thanks very much, Dave.
So there was a document or concept introduced that is the TPP, so your target product profile. This is incorporated in a document that is now a need in the EU MDR called the Clinical Development Plan. So investors are very interested in this clinical development plan. It's not a new concept as a cradle-to-grave way that you manage a product in its whole product life cycle. This document introduces all the key areas that you need to deliver. You need to deliver a quality management system, a product development strategy, and a data development strategy that is divided into two parts. One is non-clinical data, and that is your validations, and then you have your clinical data, which is in people. So the clinical development plan, it comes from pharma and it comes from biotech. It's been one of the key secret sources how biotech very early on got their investment. So this would be, I think, a key area. We've seen a lot of submissions of clinical development plans for EU MDR that is really bare bones. It's not what I've seen in medtech. And pharma, and I think there's a lot of great things that we can learn from medtech and pharma to use this document properly, to do the alignment. I've seen multinationals use that document really effectively in when you develop your data strategy, to look at your non-clinical data, look at all the ISO standards that you need to apply, and then you cross-check throughout your jurisdictions, the EU versus US. There's small little nuances that the US maybe with your biocompatibility will need different calculations, but you're still doing the same test. You're still doing it through a toxicologist. It's just an additional calculation that you can add in. So by doing this cross-mapping through your clinical development plan, you do a test once, you might pay an additional £100, just to make sure that those calculations are in through the toxicologist, and that way you can tick through all the jurisdictions that you need, and you can build like a master file that is easy to translate, whether you're in the US or you're in the UK or you're in Europe, with what the needs are.
Thanks very much. Rich, did you want to make a comment, just a brief comment about sustainability side, and then come back around?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth mentioning that there's an increasing number of funding calls going out that incorporate sustainability into them. If you, and you really should be thinking about sustainability in your device, if you are 10 plus years away from market, we know that in 2028, the NHS is going to have product carbon footprinting at the point of procurement. You can see where this is going. They're going to be comparing products based on how impactful they are on the environment. So embedding sustainability into your design early is very, very important. You open yourself up to a lot more funding calls off the back of that. It might be a net zero specific funding call. It might be a more generic call. But if you've got a net zero angle, more than just a bit of a cherry on top, but something really fundamentally embedded into your business model or the way that you're really going to be disruptive, you can get a really big fat tick, a really good score, and give you a much better chance of getting funding to get you through those earlier stages. And I'd mention at that point, it is when you get past TRLs 4, 5, and 6, it's almost starting to get a bit too late to work backwards and start thinking about sustainability as well at that point. So really get in early, establish where you're going to go with it, and then I think you open a lot more doors from that point on.
That's very good. There's a question right at the back. Someone just transfer a microphone back. I'll pick up one of the bits of paper that I've got, which actually runs on from that really, which someone has said that, you know, for a small manufacturing company, having to maintain essentially 2 technical files, one for UKCA and one for CE. I can't quite read the word. It either says I couldn't say castrating, surely. No, it says crucifying, sorry. It's crucifying industry. And I'll let someone on the panel have a quick chat about that, but I think the point that you made as well around is that that's one of the great attractions of conforming to ISO standards, which is at the end of the day is that they are internationally accepted. I've got lots of nodding going on. So one of the things I think we very much try and you do the same is to persuade people to look at those, because irrespective of which jurisdiction you're going for your regulatory approval, if you do meet ISO standards, and there aren't them for everything, then that's a very powerful tool. And you may have two technical files, but they may have very similar information in them, so that's a good question. Please, gentleman in the blue shirt.
Hi, yeah, Nick Gompertz from EarSwitch, do medical monitoring from the ear. I'd just like to talk as a bootstrapped startup, is that this, and ask your comments really how we balance this, because the ISOs and talking about regulatory standards put off bootstrap companies because you don't know where to start because they all cost a lot of money. So even doing that patent, you know, £5,000 to £7,000, you just don't have that money. So just to point out that people can write their own patents for about £200, and you can do it and have 12 months grace before you have to get in your claims and actually do the legal stuff. So really, commentary, sort of how do we balance this for people so we're not putting people off at the beginning because you don't have the resources to do all the things you're talking about that we need to plan from the start. So really just to get your ideas about that. Thank you.
Just a comment about the patents would be helpful first. Sorry, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you can write a patent by yourself. If you've had experience in that and you've done it before, you know, I'm sure it's fine. But if you've never done it before, you might miss something important that later on you might rely on. So it's maybe not advisable, but you can do it if you're really strapped for cash. Thinking about funding, you know, there is funding available from Innovate UK. You know, I would always suggest use the funding route to support your medical technology development. And, you know, working with academics or the NHS opens up other routes of funding as well. And there's charity funding. I work quite closely with a number of charities. They have translational innovation funding calls. You know, they often want a small return on that funding, but it's a really good route to fund those early, health tech, med tech developments.
Yes, please do. Thanks very much.
I just wanted to highlight as well, and I appreciate there are probably a lot of SMEs in the room, but BSI, we have a partnership with Innovate Edge. I think they've changed their name recently to Innovate Business Growth or something like that. Yeah. But there is a toolkit available, and there are resources specifically for SMEs. And also through that program, if you are part of that program, you can have access to standards as part of that project. And then we talked about sustainability and the net zero transition. BSI worked on it's called the Net Zero Guidelines, and they are freely available online, but provide a bit of an overview and just demonstrate how that transition comes across. And that was in partnership with the UN's FFC and also with ISO as well. So I would encourage everybody to have a look at those as kind of resources, just to highlight. Thanks.
Thanks very much. There was just another comment about how long someone's been waiting to get their MDR reviewed by a notified body in Europe. That's not under my control, but I have to say I do feel the pain around that. They're massively backed up with work around that. I will come to that just one second. Just the comment about taking 17 years. You may look at that and think, goodness me, well, how relevant is something that I designed 17 years ago going to be, you know, the sort of rapidly moving medtech space going to be? And I think we have to do something to reduce that time at the end of the day, and we have to look and see what we can do to do that, because I think that's key. And then sustainability, I agree, means one thing to you, and it's an important component to it, but there's also sustainable uptake in the sense that is it going to be used clinically? And is it going to continue to be used clinically? And I think that's a difficult question to answer, but I think that's a question that often we see when industry come to us. They haven't really looked at that. They haven't really decided whether it will impact upon patient care or patient pathways, or whether it will continue to do that. There was a question, please.
Well, more a comment, actually, just to talk about our journey. So we raised Northern Powerhouse investments in 2021 after spending about 12 months sweat equity, generating the invention, doing the patents and all of that good stuff. We then funded our development, and we did our first human use in New Zealand after our development of our quality system and technical file. The New Zealand market access is it's through a self-reporting, so we didn't require a notified body technical file review to get our first human use in New Zealand, which took place. So we started our development in 21. we were in first human use in October 22, and we went through the UK CA mark process. So we got the UK CA mark in, I think it was February 2023. And we're just now in scale up, about to go through our FDA application process. And I think the reflection on my journey would be, well, for our next product development, I think we'd follow that path of tech file development, so do all the testing and standards and so forth, and then do first human use in New Zealand, and then go straight to the US via the FDA. It's probably not the goal of this session, but in terms of practical development and commercialization of our technology, that was an effective pathway for us that satisfied the requirements of the Northern Power. That's how we got essentially our pitch. And then I'm going to contradict myself slightly because I've not heard this come up yet, but the NHS Innovation Service is a relatively new model and a category for selling innovation into the NHS. So previously, it gets very complex, and I'm not an expert in this space, but there were category towers for each procedure where you had to tender into, and it was very difficult to get innovation into the NHS. But there is a new, I don't know the exact time frame, but there's a relatively new process where you apply to the NHS Innovation Service. They do an evaluation of your technology. They make sure it is truly innovative. So in my previous incarnation, Johnson & Johnson couldn't come along with a new knee and say this is innovative, even though we obviously did. That sort of thing would get rejected. But an innovative technology that truly addresses an unmet need, they do a review and give you a number. It's more than that, but it's a reference number, which then allows you to go through, it's a DPS, which allows you to be registered and listed as a device that the NHS can purchase nationally through a DPS tendering process. It's something I've only become aware of recently, but it is based on your value proposition assessment. It's not based on clinical evidence, because obviously in the early days you don't have all of the clinical evidence because you don't have any usage, but they make an assessment of your technology, and if you meet their requirements, you get this number that then you can put into this innovation tender process.
No, I mean, it's a helpful comment. I mean, I think those of us that potentially have a bit of influence, and I think the HRCs will have influence with the regulator and with NICE and with other bodies. I mean, that's been very clear, and there's now 14 of them with quite a lot of people involved. I think that message is to come back and say this is what industry is moving towards doing, and it's not what we should be doing in the UK. We're seeing companies doing it all the time, but I think it's a shame. And I think it's a shame that we haven't yet implemented a structure that allows us to move forward a bit more quickly. I did promise David that I wouldn't talk about what we do, because that's a bit unfair, really, because it's his show. It's a very good show as well. But just to pick up a couple of bits that you mentioned there. One was that someone put ISO 62366 on their slide, which is the human factors usability side of it. That's fairly new, although if you look at most regulators have issued a statement around that. It becomes, because in adverse incident reporting, at least a third, probably 2/3 of incidents come from human factors poor usability. And so certainly the MHRA, their statement is they will expect to see a usability section in your technical risk file unless there's a reason not to do it. And so just to say that that's, Birmingham, we specialised in that, other places do it as well, but just to bear that in mind, that will be a component. It not only, I think, de-risks technology so that when it does go into the clinical workplace, you've got rid of some of the problems, but also I think it allows you to work out the sort of training and other capacities around it. And so I think there's that value around it. And then you mentioned about first-in-human studies in New Zealand. And again, my guess, and I'm looking about behind me here, is that I think that requirement for clinical evidence is certainly not going to get less. I'm quite sure it will go up. And there is no doubt that the understanding of the process for first-in-human studies is worth getting help with, I think, if you haven't done it before, because it is a slightly different route, and particular academics and clinicians who are used to the standard sort of randomized multi-center controlled trials, then first-in-human are very different, and they require different levels of permission and so on. And just as an example, I'm not bragging that much, but in general, the companies we work with have about 3 conversations with the agency before they get a letter of no objection. We've just been put in touch with someone who's on their 14th letter. with the agency asking for further information, and that's because the application was poorly written. So I would say lots of people, there are places that do it, but if you're going to go to first in human, then get specialist advice early on, because it's a minefield if you don't do it properly. Is that all right? I'm sorry, I didn't want to promote too much what we do. Any more questions for the panel? If not, I'll have to think of some more. Please. Well, while the microphone's getting over there, I'll just... I think just to mention standards, I think one of the problems is that interpreting them is not always terribly straightforward. I have to say there must be a real education in how to write them, so they make them extremely difficult to understand. I remember taking the one about ICU ventilators in 2020 and turning a 32-page document into 1.5 sides of A4 as to what it actually said. So I think that, but in all fairness to say, I'd shout out for BSI were fantastically helpful during that process. And not only made all the standards free for that period of time, but also helped with interpreting them. That was extremely valuable. Please, at the back.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lee. I'm a surgical registrar from Birmingham. I just wanted to ask about the sustainability angle, actually. Just briefly looking over the BSI guidance. There's a lot around the scopes and about assessment of the wider value chain. But again, I wanted to ask if, firstly, who will be providing the regulatory approval come 2028? Will it be the notified bodies? And secondly, is there any plan to take in the bigger, wider patient pathway? So, for example, if robotic surgery may initially have upfront high carbon costs, but if it improves patients' outcomes and reduces length of stay, overall that actually has lower carbon costs. How can we demonstrate that?
This is probably one for Emma, but I'll jump in very quickly. So yeah, the NHS roadmap in 2028, they talk about product carbon footprinting. I've had a few conversations with Heidi Barnard and her team around what this might look like, and they're not releasing much information on it at the moment, but our understanding is that they are working with BSI on it. So maybe we can get a little bit more light on that.
I should highlight sustainability is healthcare is my field, whereas sustainability is not so much. But I think it's worth highlighting that this is a big priority area for businesses, for BSI as an entire organization, sustainability and AI. And that's why we're doing the work with ISO around the net zero guidelines. Within healthcare specifically, I know there's a lot of work going on around circular economy, and we're working closely with the Department of Health and Social Care on this particular program. And I believe it's the University of Exeter as well that are leading that. But I can definitely put you in touch with the relevant people who are working on that project if that would be useful. Yeah, I think those are my kind of key takeaways if there's anything else. Yeah.
I think in lieu of that, more visibility on that, there are a lot of carbon calculating tools out there that you can start to use to get an idea of where your product sits and possibly benchmark yourself against some competitors. That can be quite difficult when you don't know where products or materials are being shipped from and things like that, but you can start to get a bit of an idea. So I think that's probably worth doing in lieu of more transparency on it.
Thanks very much. There's a question there.
I just wanted to also state that we are seeing the conclusions. You were talking about coming to the clinical benefit of the patient and then consolidating it with sustainability. We're seeing conclusions being made in a document called the Clinical Evaluation Plan. So here we've got to give an overall benefit risk assessment. And we've seen a few companies that have gone green that is putting the sustainability and the overall benefit into that area to count towards the benefit risk. We think this is where everything is going to go towards.
Thank you, very helpful.
Thanks. I was just going to make that point that Lizzie made is about the carbon footprint's not just the manufacturing of it, is it? Clearly, it's the longer term, which is more difficult. Rich, what extent do you think the regulations are going to, because I mean, there's obviously a difference between regulations and whether or not somebody's prepared to pay for it and look at the carbon footprint. And I'm not aware of a massive amount of work being done within the regulations around that. Is that right or not?
I think it's probably ongoing. So I work with the DHSC on the Design for Life program, and this has been a cross-industry collaborative exercise with academics, industry, the NHS and their sustainability team have been involved in that. And yes, so there is lots happening. There's a lot of interdependencies on this. So medical device will be designed to meet regulations, right? And if regulations don't reflect the increasingly scarce material resources, etc., that we're moving into, that needs to be reflected in the standards. So it is starting to come in. It is on the agenda, is our understanding. And one point, just to go back to the care pathway, have a look at the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition. They have a carbon care pathway calculator on their website. It's a bit rudimentary, but it's a good place to start. Also speak to people in health economics, because carbon care pathway has been quite nicely tacked on to health economics. You can kind of attach carbon costs to monetary costs throughout the pathway, and that's another way of looking at it. So take a look at that as well.
No, that's helpful. And just to say, currently my understanding is you cannot sell something in the UK unless it meets the medical device regulations, but it doesn't mean people have to buy it. So I think one has to be clear about that, is that there are two arguments to make. There's a question on the table there, thank you.
Actually, a small comment, because I heard that, I'm Professor of Intervention Radiology in Leeds, and also part of co-team lead in the HLC going forward. I heard about first in human, we're going to New Zealand. I want to contradict that, because we have worked with an American company, and we led the global first on behalf of the world, the pilot technology through for evidence generations. And actually, MHRA has been very, very prompt at approving along the process. So if you are interested and industry partners want to do global first or first in humans, I think Leeds is a great place to start if you're ever looking for any partners. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I support that. I think Birmingham's not bad either. But no, there are loads of places that do it. But I think the point, I wasn't actually trying to suggest that the delays in this particular case I was talking about were anything to do with the MHRA, actually. And actually the opposite. I think they've bent over backwards to try and be helpful. They do ask some slightly obtuse questions, and that's one of the reasons you need a bit of help, is to how to answer those. But no, here the delay, this massive delay, was down to the fact that the company in particular just didn't see why it needed to obey the rules and write a decent application. Well, we've hit 11 o'clock, and I'm going to call, I think we're ready for a cup of coffee. Can I say thank you very, very much indeed to the panel here. Thank you very much indeed, all taking part in that. And to you very much as an audience. It's been a most enjoyable morning. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.